Hello, everybody. My name is Michaela Madrid, and I'm on staff here at Sovereign Bodies Institute. We're really excited to be here today for a great conversation about reimagining support for Indigenous trafficking survivors. This is part of our Awareness Month for Trafficking Awareness Month, which is every January. Our Survivors Leadership Council has organized and coordinated this really awesome month-long events, including webinars, PSAs, and just a lot of other great things. So keep an eye on our Facebook page to keep up with those events. After this webinar here, we'll be doing another one next Wednesday, the 27th at 5:30. That is going to be a Meet the Survivors session. And then our last one will be on Friday, the 29th. We'll be having a webinar about trafficking and Native foster youth. So to kick off today's webinar, we'd like to invite all the panelists to turn on their videos and come on screen, and to just give a little bit of an introduction, a little bit about yourself, the program that you're here representing, and the work that you do. So we'll have Lisa go first.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Heth, and I am the Executive Director for Pathfinder Center, which is a place of refuge for victim survivors of human trafficking. We are located in central South Dakota. Our main office is on the Crow Creek Reservation. We serve the whole state of South Dakota, but we're specific to Indigenous women. We all offer culturally sensitive services. We opened our doors in 2017. However, we started working in 2015, and we opened Pathfinder in July of 2017 to survivors of human trafficking. We have 14 rooms available, and that are available not just for single, but also for mothers and their children. I've also been doing this work in serving victims of domestic violence and sexual assault for going on over 30 years now on the Crow Creek Reservation. We have a domestic violence shelter located here as well. So I don't want to take up too much time. I could go on and on.
Yes,
Anyway, I'm happy to be here.
yes, thanks, Lisa. All right, Melissa, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Shouting. I am from Kainai Nation, located in Alberta, Canada. I am currently a Master's in Science student at the University of Lethbridge, and I am in the process of developing a model for developing culturally grounded centers for Indigenous women and girls for SBI. Yeah. So I do a lot of advocacy work, and I used to work with organizations before I started my master's. Grad school is just super hard. And we've had a lot of changes in my area. So a lot of the work that I used to do is not there anymore, which I will talk about a little bit later as we go on. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Melissa. Wynette, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Wynette Renville from the System Wapton Oyate. Right now I'm going to school for my general studies. I do a lot of advocacy work. It comes from stemming from my sister. She was a victim of sex trafficking and was found murdered in 2005. So since then, I've been her voice, and my mom ran the domestic violence shelter here for a long time. She just recently kind of retired, and but yeah, so we do a lot of our own things around our community. We don't have no organizations that direct towards sex trafficking. So we just do it on our own, and we were planning something for the end of the month. About it.
Thanks, Manette. Nita, would you like to finish this off? You're on mute.
Every time. Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Lucchese, and I'm Executive Director of Sovereign Bodies Institute, which is hosting this webinar today. Today, I'm joining to represent our services program at SBI, as well as a perspective of a survivor. I'm a Cheyenne descendant, and I'm a survivor of trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault. And I'm also the founder of SBI and working with our services coordinator, Carla Cheney, to develop the services that we provide to not only Indigenous victims of trafficking, but their families and MMIW families.
Thank you. So just to give the listeners an idea of what this webinar is going to look like. So we have a few questions prepared for our panelists here, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So if a question pops in your head while we're talking, please comment on our Facebook feed, and I'll be sure to be monitoring that so that we can have get these panelists insight on your questions. So the first question, and we'll go with Melissa first for this question. So question number one, what is the existing landscape of services for Indigenous victims of trafficking in your area? What's working and what's not, and what are the gaps that you see?
Well, we have services that are designed for women in our area, but in Southern Alberta, services for Indigenous women who are victims of trafficking is very slim. There's a lot of organizations that say they're going to work with these women, but when they do try to access services, it's usually they basically get the runaround. So there's been a few times where I've called and had to tell frontline service providers, okay, well, this is what your website says, this is what your services are stating, and the, I guess the support that you can give these women. But right now, there was just a woman that had called you and you basically turned her down. So what is it that you provide for somebody in this situation? So that's where my advocacy work comes in. I'm not technically with an organization. I have worked with multiple organizations in the city of Lethbridge, but as soon as I realized that what their mission statement is not what they're delivering to those individuals is, I guess, not matching. I usually decide to step away from an organization. And so during that process, that's how I've become this advocate for individuals in who are experiencing homelessness or unsheltered women, or, you know, if they're experiencing trafficking or sex work, they end up calling me or reaching out to me on Facebook. And then they just say, hey, like, we're trying to get into this organization, but they've turned us away. Can you call for them? So I've basically had to use their own mission statements against them and say, you know, where is your, like, why are you not doing what you said you're going to do? And if you're not there for Indigenous women, then where do you turn them to? So for like, there's a lot of organizations that say they're there for women, but when it comes to Indigenous women in my area, they don't really have the support that they need. For instance, one of the women had told me about an incident where they were seeking shelter from an organization, and the worker within that organization had started to talk to them about their sex work. And it was, she, like, when we sit down and talk about sex work, it's not a shameful discussion. It's, you know, the realities that they have to live within. And it's a reality that has come to exist, and we shouldn't shame women for their current situations. We should be supporting them. But this individual was a male within an organization being employed to provide a safe haven. And he had started like talking and degrading her because she was trying to survive. Like, if you're unsheltered and you don't have the resources to make yourself presentable within a colonial setting, how are you going to obtain employment? How are you going to, navigate certain spaces where they're already seeing you as less than? So she had done something that she knows she shouldn't have. She was eating noodles, and she had gotten so mad because of what he was saying to her. And so she kind of tossed some, and she ended up losing access to those services for a month. And, during wintertime, like that's something that shouldn't be happening. You shouldn't be reducing access to services because of somebody's behavior. So I guess it's just, people are not trained. Like, you have organizations employing individuals who have post-secondary education, but when it comes to this population and individuals who have experienced sex trafficking, you need to have a level of like certain humility. You need to have understanding. You need to have empathy, and that, I feel like, in today's world is not being taught at home. And you have individuals, we just had an article where they said they're cleaning up the park in the mornings by sweeping it, because a lot of unsheltered individuals sleep there. But like, when you use certain language as cleaning up, what does that say about the individuals that are taking up that space? Like, they're human beings. They're not something to be cleaned up. But the level of the amount of individuals who are occupying that space shows that there are no services for them in this area. And if there are, they've reached capacity. Like, we have a shelter here that's designed for a number way less than the total population that it needs to serve. So yeah, we're just, in Southern Alberta, it's really lacking. And there's just not a lot of, I guess, understanding or knowledge that is being transferred to frontline service providers when it comes to victims of trafficking or just unsheltered people. Like, there just needs to be understanding. There needs to be awareness, but I think we have to move past awareness. I've told a number of people, including Anita, like, we get stuck in that awareness phase. We get stuck in raising awareness. We get stuck in constantly finding ways to make people aware of the situation, when in reality, we just need to get up and do something. We need to figure out where the gaps are. We need to start asking the people. Like, my background is in public health, but I never pretend that I know what is needed within my area. If somebody asks me, what do we need to help these people? Well, you go to the people that you're going to help. You ask them. We don't have the answers. We can go to school and get all the tools that we can, acquire within a post-secondary institution to bring the world forward and to continue existing within this community or within, a colonial setting. But in reality, if we want to make change, we need to ask the people that we say we're trying to help. Because if we don't ask them what they need, we don't know how to help them. So yeah, it's just, we've lost a lot of services within the last, I guess, fiscal year. We used to have a consumption site which had a ton of wraparound services, and they were doing great work. And that was just something that was between them and our governing bodies within the province. So when those services got cut, like the organization completely dissolved. Our provincial government came in and they had said, you know, this is what's going on. So they just cut the services. And then when you have a population that needs services when they say they need it, not when we need it, or not when we're able to provide those services, but when they need the services, it needs to be there so they can walk through the door. And that center was open 24/7. So they always had access to frontline service providers that could help them navigate the system. But when that organization was dissolved, it took away everything, and they had to learn how to re-navigate the system. Like even myself, I'm learning about the organizations that are coming in to replace those services that were taken away from them. And we all know how hard it is to navigate a system when you're housed. Imagine when you're unhoused, or imagine when, you know, you're just trying to survive. You're not going to be able to navigate those systems, because if we have trouble navigating them as we are ourselves today, imagine the difficulty that they have. So it's just, we're going through a transition within my area, and I don't know how that's going to look in the future, but right now it's just, we're lacking services. We're lacking services that are for Indigenous women. We're lacking services that help Indigenous women after they've reached a certain point in their life, or after they've experienced something within their life. We have a great organization that works with family preservation and moves forward with individuals who are raising their families and are going forward within culture. So Opagosan is an amazing organization in the city of Lethbridge, and it is run by it's run by Indigenous people, and they have a board that governs them, and they provide services that are great for families and for individuals that need those services. But when someone is unhoused, and I know one individual that I do try to help a lot, and she used to access services for families, and that's when she had her family. But now she is unhoused, and she is just simply trying to survive. There's some individuals that will openly talk about trafficking, and then there's some individuals that don't want to talk about it because they're not comfortable talking about it. So they use different terms. But this individual, like if she wants services, she can't go to the organizations that she used to access when she wasn't in the situation that she's currently in. So where are they supposed to go when they can't access the services that they used to access when they weren't, unhoused or experiencing just those negative outcomes? Like we all talk about unhoused individuals, or we all know about women and how they have to survive, and we know that it exists, but we don't, like, nobody's taking the step to go and create something for them where they feel safe to access services. So we're just really lacking in that area. In other areas, it's great, but for unsheltered women, there's just, there's not a whole lot, because they're not going to feel comfortable going to a man. They're not going to feel comfortable going to people that used to bully them when they were younger. I live in a really tight-knit community, and Southern Alberta is super small. So it's just, there's so many dynamics that are coming into play, and it's yeah, that's currently where we are.
Yeah, for sure. So you bring up a lot of really great points, but I think overall it's just the need to be really flexible and grounded in community when it comes to services. So we'll move on to Lynette with the same question. So I'll repeat it. So what is the existing landscape of services for Indigenous victims of trafficking in your area? What's working and what's not, and what are the gaps that you see?
Well, currently, we have nothing in my community for um, for anything towards the for any woman or if someone's trying to escape. There's nothing here. There's no services, even if they need to talk. So that's why now I'm trying with my mother and my sisters. We're on our own trying to make awareness, and we're looking into resources for a shelter. Because Lisa has a shelter. I didn't know that. I thought there was none in South Dakota. Um, it's very much needed here. When I was working at the Wachunga shelter, we had quite a few coming through, and I wasn't ready for to help. I wasn't trained how to help them, and there's a lot of things that I didn't know that they had taught me, and there's still things that I need to learn. And that's about it.
Thank you so much. So Lisa, I'll pose the same question to you. So what do services look like in your area?
Well, like I said before, we established Pathfinder Center. Mainly there were just domestic violence shelters that were providing these services to survivors of human trafficking, which I may add, a lot of the shelters were doing a really poor job of providing services to them, specifically that were culturally sensitive to Native women. And so, and not understanding their needs are way different than domestic violence victims. And so that's the main reason why we started Pathfinder Center, was to provide a place that was one of a kind in all of South Dakota. And when I say one of a kind, we are one of a kind because we provide those culturally sensitive services to women that come there, and all our staff are Native that provide these services. And so we not only provide those services to women from other reservations or from the state, but we've also had women come from other states as well. And whether they were Native or non-Native, that the non-Natives were able to, um, you know, to get the services from Native women. I believe that as a Native person, we are all, in this unique position to be able to provide services not only to our own, but to other women as well, other Indigenous women, non-Native women. And a lot of the services that we provide, the first thing is really understanding and getting that training and knowing, providing that while these women have a lot of traumas upon traumas, layers of trauma, and it's going to take a while in helping and providing those services. So when survivors go to domestic violence shelters and you only have 30 days max, they're freaking out, like, what are they going to do? So that was the reason, one of the reasons why that we started Pathfinder Center, was to provide long-term refuge for them up to 24 months that a woman can stay there and be able to. The first month is just, knowing that they have a safe place to come to, that they can take 30 days to rest, relax, think about what they want to do. And we don't like have them on a timeline, like you got to do this, and just building that rapport and trust with them, because they don't have trust. They don't trust. A lot of the systems have failed them. A lot of law enforcement has failed them. Some of these women have gotten their children taken away. They've gotten blamed for it. And so the services and just building that trust with them and listening to them and what are their needs, providing those options to them, not saying, oh, you got to do this, this, and this, and here's a checkoff list, but providing those options of, like, that just giving them all those options of what they can do, what they're capable of, helping them to remove those layers of trauma one at a time, and helping them to understand that we all have purpose in life. Every single one of us on this webinar, we've all got a purpose and a calling in our life, and so do those that we serve, and helping them to find what is their purpose, what is their passion. So we provide so many services. We provide arts therapy, we provide uh, uh, it's called we call it uplifting self-care, but really what it is it's providing trauma services. I'm trying to think. We have an advocate that has received over 200 hours of specialized training under Dr. Ruby Gibson, who's out of Rapid City there. And so she's able to do trauma healing with them. And it's really about, it's not her doing the work. It's just her leading and guiding them and in healing. And what are the things, that are um, triggering her, and helping her to figure those out. And we all know that, going to a counselor isn't for everybody. It doesn't work for everybody. About time you get into talking and that, and then it's like, okay, well, my next client is here, so we got to wrap this up. And then you're feeling worse. You're feeling horrible. I mean, I've went to counselors and stuff, and it doesn't work for me. I end up leaving feeling worse. So we do things like sand tray storytelling. We we do we do provide, like I said, the uplifting self-care, the art therapy, and providing all those different options for them to be able to heal. And and just giving them that support. We do support groups. We even bring a survivor in who can connect with them. Our overall goal in the long run is that one day we can be able to have other survivors working there providing this service, because it really does make a big difference when you have a survivor that has healed and went through all this, that can come and connect with them and know what they're going through, because they need that connectedness and know that somebody understands them, and that they're not the only one that has went through that trauma, and like, oh my gosh, it's not just me. I thought I was the only one that was treated that way. And it's just like in the domestic violence movement, a lot of survivors became advocates providing those services to other women. And that's what we need to see more of, these women healed, so they can, if that's their choice that they want to go into helping other women, it really makes a big difference. Providing also, the cultural services. We provide many of the, we have, sage on hand, sweetgrass, things that they need. They're allowed, to have it in their rooms. The thing about Pathfinder Center, it's 14 rooms. Each woman has her own room, her own space. She needs her own space, not in a room, sharing it with, one or two other women. It doesn't work. So they have their own room, their own private bathroom. The only thing that they have to share is the kitchen area, and then we have a TV room that they can share, and they can watch movies together. We have a resource room that has sewing machines. We have a space for beading, just doing all kinds of different cultural activities there. We have computers that they can get online, they can take classes. We also provide, if they need to get their GED, we provide those services, help them with that. Uh, and one of the things that, like I said, it really does make a big difference when women, Indigenous women, are receiving their services from other Indigenous women. We had a youth that she was getting services and from other other providers that uh, didn't have any type of cultural services, and she was running away from these facilities. I mean, they had her there. I mean, of course, she needed the services because she was being trafficked, but she was also um, under she was on probation and under the Department of Social Services. And this, I'm talking about another state. And so we were able to get on a call with their whole team and tell them that, it does make a difference. A native being with other service providers, having their culture, um, and being able to relate. And this young girl would run away from these other facilities. She never ran away once coming to ours because she was able to get the services. She was able to relate. And so it really makes a big difference and in those services. So I think, the thing is just providing as many options to survivors as we can and letting them choose what's best for them, and not trying to say you need to do this, this, and this. We can offer those suggestions. We never give women advice. We give them options, which is a huge thing. We need to give them back control of their lives and help them, giving them good choices to choose from, and that makes a big difference. So before we had Pathfinder, yeah, the services just weren't there. Um, and so the process for getting into our services is one that, there's a process of filling out an application. But what we want to do is make sure that, are we the right fit for you, not are you the right fit for us? Because the thing is that we want to make sure that we can offer to you what you need. And it's not about, oh my gosh, we can't take her in because of this or that. I mean, we've taken in a lot of women, that have, there's a lot of issues, layers of trauma. That doesn't stop us. But if we don't have those services there for her, then, why set her up to bring her in and fail? So, and I think one of the biggest things is that, right now we can't fill all 14 rooms. I mean, we can only have up to, 6 survivors at a time because um, it's the amount of time it takes to provide the services to one woman is it really takes a lot of your time and your support. And so to be able to fill it up and then not be able to provide their the services would do injustice, not only to the women, but the staff as well. It would burn them out and we wouldn't have, any staff there to provide the services. So we're not about these these, big numbers, and, that we're about the quality of services, and that making a difference, uh, be it, one at a time, and and just providing that, giving them the time that they need, and to let them know that we hear you, we believe you, we support you. And the nice thing about Pathfinder Center, it's a 24-hour security system. Um, we have a 8-foot fence all around there. And so anytime somebody tries to break in, alarm goes off. Um, so security, law enforcement comes right in. And so it's a very secure place, and not to say that when women come there, all of a sudden, oh, I feel safe. I mean, for any new place you go into, it takes a while for you to feel, like safe. Um, but having, the cameras and stuff, and knowing that, if anybody tries to break in there, that they'll be safe, and that law enforcement, it takes them less than 5 minutes to be on site there. And so I think the other thing is that, yeah, the gaps we still, because of our small communities, is with law enforcement. They still need a lot of training. They still need to see a lot of what's happening in our communities, because they're not seeing it. One, because the lack of law enforcement officers that we have on our reservations. Um, and also the other is sometimes, on, like all reservations, sometimes you get other officers that are detailed there from other reservations. So they're not aware of they don't, know about the background and the community, or where people live, and that. So, so, so that's some of the gaps, is just for them to have more training, and knowing about sex trafficking, and to how to be able to recognize it in our communities. And I still am a firm believer. Yes, we still need education and awareness, and to get people on board, so that we can take action um, in providing these services. And the biggest thing in our communities is, we are starting to see so many more of our young girls, go missing. We're seeing this, more and more in South Dakota, and on the Crow Creek and Lorber reservations. And so that's one of the things, is that, we've gotten a grant from a foundation, so we're able to we were able to put some funding in there to help with transportation, to bring these girls home, or to help family members to go after them, whether it be to maybe another state, and providing those services. And I think, there are other, like funding, I don't, most of our funding comes from foundation and money. We are moving away from federal grants, because there's just too many hoops to jump through, red tape. And, I'm not even sure how many federal funding that can allow people to, help with missing women, and that. So that's something that, is no longer, we're able to help and assist with that, and printing posters, and help getting that ball rolling for the families. And so I can go on and on, so I don't want to take up the time. So anyway.
Yes, well, thank you so much. So Anita, we'll finish this question out with you. What does the landscape of services for Indigenous victims of trafficking look like in your area?
Well, I want to answer this question by speaking to my experience as a survivor. And I don't currently live in the area where I was trafficked. But I think it's important to hear kind of the survivor perspective of what would have been useful to me. And I think the biggest thing is just that I really didn't access any services except the food bank. There wasn't, I was in a bigger city that has a really large urban Indian population. There is a Native Family Services program there, kind of like what Melissa was speaking to. But just as Melissa was saying, they offer great family services, but don't, necessarily step in for victims and survivors. And one of the things that was really important to me was I didn't see my trafficker as like a monster. I saw him as a victim. He was Indigenous himself. He also experienced various forms of violence, including sexual exploitation at points in his life, and really struggled with mental health to the point where he'd have like PTSD-induced seizures. And so I wanted to be safe, and I wanted the violence to stop, and I wanted him to have a path to healing, but I didn't want to put him in a jail cell. And it didn't feel like there were any services in my area that were going to support me if I didn't want to report. And I was afraid of reporting, not only because I didn't want him incarcerated, because I didn't feel like it would, incarceration doesn't heal people. And I wanted him to heal, but also because I was genuinely afraid of law enforcement. Police in that city had killed somebody I knew. I had seen them commit, brutality. I had been solicited by law enforcement. And then the day that I left, my trafficker was under Department of Corrections supervision at the time. And his DOC officer actually called me and asked me to go back to him and said, basically like, well, I know that you're a big source of stability for him. I know that you help him generate income, and it would be really great if you would just go back. Which to me is just, unconscionable for law enforcement to ask a victim or a survivor to do that. And so I really didn't trust law enforcement or feel safe with them. I didn't want to work with an organization that was going to require me to work with law enforcement or require me to report or judge me for not wanting to report. And so I just felt like there really wasn't anything available to me. So I think, one of the big things that we've heard from all of the speakers today is to meet survivors where they're at. Listen to them, listen to their priorities, listen to what they're comfortable with and what they feel like they really need, and help them get those needs met. Because I think there's a lot of survivors that maybe would come forward and would access support if they felt like they had more power in the process of deciding what kind of support they were actually going to get.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll move to our next question. And with this, we'll go to Wynette first, and then we'll do our rounds. So there's been a lot of talk about this need on this panel here to move away from awareness and to actually put that awareness into action and to do something. So what kind of support and resources do Indigenous communities need to be able to build these effective services for trafficking victims and their families? Is it funding? Is it changes with leadership, changes in law enforcement, something else? What would really help be able to take that next step?
Well, like I said earlier, we have nothing here, and it's happening at all three of our casinos. I was even approached by some guy at one of the casinos right in front of my husband, and I was just blown away. And so the security guard was standing, ears, like he could hear, and he just, turned his head and like he must get a cut of something. But there's a lot of that going around here, and I was trying to do put red stand at go to each of the casinos, and I was denied. The GM there said no, and so that's why me and my mom kind of held off. I'm like, well, what's another plan we should do then? But yeah, there is nothing here, and nobody trusts the police here, and there's just no education on it, nothing. So we need all of the above here. And I think Lisa sounds like she has a very good program there. And
Yeah, definitely. With a crisis as large as this, it's going to take a lot of avenues to be able to see change. So I don't think that we have to stop awareness to be able to go to the next step. We really need to keep being able to turn all of these wheels at the same time. So with that, Melissa, would you like to answer? What kind of support would be helpful to be able to do more on this issue?
So I think, well, I know you asked about like leadership and serve organizations. We, a lot of times leadership, I know all about policies, and in order to change something, you need to prove that you need to prove that policies need to be changed in order to change an organization or an approach or just how things are done. So I know within Alberta, because Alberta within Canada is different, each province is different, and each province has different regulations put in place. And then there's Canada as a whole. But within my province and within my area, my work is looking at developing a center where women have a safe place to go. It's not about, in the beginning, I was like, you know what, I need to speak to everybody. I need to speak to elders. I need to speak to professionals. And now it's shifted into, I just need to talk to the women that are experiencing this. I can see what is provided by organizations, and I can understand those programs and those initiatives, but in reality I just need to talk to the women to see what they need, because like Anita said, sometimes they don't want to put their person behind bars, or sometimes they love that person gives them a safe place to live, that person gives them stability, and that person offers protection. And when you're unsheltered and when you're living in somebody else's home that is not your home, you become dependent on those individuals to protect you and to house you. And if you're unhoused, you depend on those individuals to protect you on the street. So it's just, I want to develop a framework that looks at providing a safe space for women where they are at, and looking at meeting the needs that they need to be met. So if they need, they just want to learn about who they are or their identity or their kinship, because with residential school, a lot of families lost that, the ability to transmit knowledge that is pertaining to families. So even just reclaiming who they are and where they come from, just a place where they can learn about their potential, learn about what their gifts are and what they can contribute to the world. Because I think it was Lisa, we do all have, a purpose here, and it's up to us to find out what that purpose is and to move forward and to give what Creator has gifted us and share that with the world and share that with our people. But I think overall, we just need education. Like we know trafficking is there. We know victims of trafficking need support, but we need to let go of those biases when it comes to sex work and trafficking, because sometimes individuals don't see it as trafficking. They just see it as sex work. So we need to understand that people have different definitions, or they have a different understanding of certain terms, and we need to meet them where they are, and we need to understand where they're coming from, how they view the world, and then move forward in providing those services. So yeah. And as for, do Indigenous victims need different kinds of support services? I think like, yeah, what they do, they need something that is, you know, culturally sensitive. They need something that understands the historical experiences and of those people as a whole, and of that, you know, community. And sometimes individuals are not tied to their community. Sometimes individuals are aging out of the foster care system and they don't know what community they belong to. They don't know who their people are. And when you have another Indigenous person ask you, where do you come from? Who are your people? And you've aged out of the foster care system, you know, that can be another way of being shamed. Or, you know, it's, as an Indigenous person, you're tied to a community, you're tied to family. And if you don't know where, you know, if you don't know that and somebody asks you and you don't know how to answer that, you're not going to feel good about yourself. So I think it's a very faceted issue. It has a lot of different, it's almost like a diamond. You know, you have to understand each cut within that diamond in order to understand how the diamond, in order to enjoy the look or the overall area. And if you don't, then we're always going to be walking around in circles. We're always going to be looking at this person and saying, oh yeah, that, you know, that approach works, but that approach may work for that individual in that time during their life. It's not going to work for every single individual. We don't have a cookie cutter approach. We need to have Indigenous people leading these forefronts and be at the front and say, I'm here for you. I'm here to support you. I'm here to listen to you. And I'm here to help you navigate this space or the institutions that you're about to walk into. And I know it's scary, but I'm here to hold your hand. And when you have your own people's support, it brings a sense of community. And a lot of times individuals or victims just want to feel belonged. And that's why they're in the situation that they're in. Because at one point they may have felt lost, or they may have had nobody to turn to, and this person offered that space where they can belong. So yeah, I don't think we can change leadership. There's no point changing leadership. There's benefits in educating our people on what trafficking is and how individuals understand trafficking, and how sometimes the individual themselves may not even realize that they're being trafficked. So it's just about providing that education component and then coming together as a whole and letting those individuals lead, lead us as we walk towards healing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Melissa. So Lisa, same question to you. What kind of support or resources are needed to really make a difference on this issue?
Well, I think that number one, we have to continue to educate. That's something that we're always going to have to do. Things change. Perpetrators change their techniques. The traffickers change. So it's an ongoing thing that we need to continue to, that law enforcement has to get training, that we need to train our youth in the schools about the prevention, what are the things to look for. And I think also parents need to know that uh, you can't just give your child a cell phone or a tablet and let that be the babysitter. That's the worst thing. That's like just, letting a burglar in your house. And, you wouldn't let a stranger come into your house. You wouldn't invite them to come in, and stay the night, someone that you don't know. But basically, that's what a lot of parents do. So I think it's important that we, um, that we educate parents on, that they need to be watchful of what are their children, what are they on, what that they, you know, if they're paying for that phone, if they're living under their household, they have an obligation, as far as a parent obligation to protect that child, and that means by them saying, you need their passwords. You need their passwords to their social media. You need to be checking often. What are they on? Who are they talking with? Because we know that a lot of the youth that have been lured away, a lot of them is been through social media. Somebody that they met online, and when your youth child is putting online about personal stuff about what's going on at home, like, oh, my parents are out drinking, or, oh, my dad is never around, or mom's not here, are they going to bingo or the casino, you and or yeah, my parents just don't get me. The traffickers see this information and they take it and they use it to their advantage, and they friend that child. And so they even if it's going to take them a week to even a year, they're going to invest that time into getting that trust of that child, and to lure them away. So I think it's really important that um, we educate the parents out there, and the youth, and what are some of those social media sites that they need to be avoiding. What are some of those apps that they can download that a parent could just think it may be a clock, something very innocent, but we need to be teaching those things, and just being able to to keep abreast on the latest technology and what's going on out there. I think when we talk about family members, um, or not wanting to get a boyfriend, sent to jail. Well, yeah, I understand about the as far as sending to prison. I mean, it does nothing to heal. It's not set up for that. So when they are serving time, sometimes they come out worse. And but I think one of the things is that we need to look at is our tribal courts, and I would say, as far as our tribal nations, are we really truly sovereign? When we can't prosecute our own, when we have to have the feds come down and prosecute, because we don't have the means to do it. I think, a lot of our tribes need to start looking at prosecuting. We need to look at, what are some of those uh, circle sentencing, in the courts where you have the family members, the whole family sitting in, and deciding, what's going to be, whether it's uncle, whether it's a grandchild, what's going to be their sentence, and that they all hold them accountable. And we need to go back to some of those traditions, and looking at, restorative practices, rather than sending them off to federal prison, because we all know that that's a big failure. And when they get out, they go to these halfway houses. Those don't work. I mean, they go to a halfway house. The halfway house gets their money for keeping them. What's their thing that they tell them they have to do? Oh, go get out and get a job, because they get a certain percentage of these prisoners that came out. They get a certain percentage of their check. And that, so they're wanting them, they're not doing anything to help them go get a job. That's the number one thing, is they go make them search for jobs. And that's all a lot of our tribes need to do. That's the other thing, is they need to start doing is their own, looking at doing their own rehabilitation, when they're coming out of prison, and having them come back to the reservation, and going into um, uh, these real, what, transitioning back and stuff and doing a lot of traditional things with them and stuff. Yeah, there's not a lot of jobs on our reservations, but teaching some of the traditional things, or what are some of the things that they could be doing to giving back and paying back, our tribal societies and for what they did. And I think that that would make a huge difference. The other thing is we really need, I believe is, I've had, is with the men. I've worked with a lot of men who have, we talk about, women, 1 in 3 by the time they're 18. I believe those stats are about the same for our young men. It's just the fact that they don't come forward. They don't talk because a lot of the stigmas, and also because a lot of the perpetrators do tend to target them because they know young boys aren't going to say anything. So um, so a lot of these men that are, doing the perpetrating and stuff, they need healing. And so I think that we need to also look at healing our men and our young boys in our community, and teaching them and helping them to become the warriors that the Creator created them to be to protect the women, the children, our lands, our air, and our water. Otherwise, we're not going to see our crimes go down on the reservation until we start seeing our men heal. And then that's when we're going to start seeing more of our women heal as well. So we just need more of our men in our communities to start standing up and helping the other men to heal and start protecting our women and children, especially against those coming in from the outside, because we are seeing more of traffickers who are starting to recruit local people in our communities who can recruit the young girls in the community. And a lot of people think that it's always male. No, there are recruiters that are female. So so we need to be looking for these things. We need to be training up people to become the warriors and the protectors, and let the men start taking up their place. So
Absolutely.
thanks.
Yeah, it's so important to break that cycle of violence. And that's something that we are really working on here at SBI and to uplift, because we know that at the end of the day, our people just need to heal. And all these support services, that needs to be the ultimate goal, is towards healing. So thank you.
Yes.
So with that, we'll have Anita. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of support and resources are needed to end this crisis?
I think the two biggest things that I see survivors consistently need that they lack access to are legal representation
Yes.
and then access to culturally relevant healing and therapy. Finding an Indigenous therapist is like finding a needle in the haystack. There's some really great ones out there, but there's not nearly enough. And that's absolutely crucial, as well as like traditional healing programs and some of the culturally relevant services that some of our speakers have talked about. I know for me as a survivor, one of the most pivotal moments in my healing journey that was really life-saving for me was two experiences I had of ceremony. And I'm someone that did not grow up in my culture, so ceremony was something that was unfamiliar to me. But to be invited into that space and to be really loved on and cared for in that space was really life-changing for me. So things like that are absolutely crucial. And then the legal representation piece, it's one of the few things SBI doesn't offer because we don't have an attorney on staff, but it's absolutely crucial. So many survivors of trafficking have histories of being criminalized for things, even if it's like petty theft or substance possession, or sometimes they're criminalized for prostitution. Those are things that they shouldn't have to deal with in trying to navigate getting back on their feet and healing. And there's amazing, wonderful attorneys throughout Indian country, but very few of them work with survivors and victims. So that's definitely a huge need. And I know at SBI, aside from those two things, we really try to meet survivors where they're at. We're still working on developing the services we provide, but it's definitely been a challenge, even especially during the pandemic. We have so many people asking us for grocery assistance, rental assistance, help getting into therapy because the pandemic and quarantining is bringing up a lot of old trauma. So we've been trying to meet those needs as best we can. But I think, one of the biggest issues is there are amazing places like Pathfinder Center, but Pathfinder is one of a kind. When really we need like 20 Pathfinder centers. And Pathfinder Center probably needs another like 10 to 15 staff members. So part of it is just getting the funding where it needs to go to support the good work that's already happening so that it can continue to grow and continue to support more survivors.
That's so beautiful what you say, because right now we are really seeing this kind of national movement to solve the human trafficking issue. But it's a lot of this kind of, the federal government knows what's best for us, so they're going to decide how to solve these issues instead of, like you say, invest in what's already happening. So it just makes so much more sense to redirect these funds into places that already know how to serve the communities that they serve, instead of having the federal government trying to reinvent the wheel. So that's so important. Thank you. So we'll move into our final question before we open it up for Q&A. So we'll go with Waynette first. How can the community get involved in supporting Indigenous victims of trafficking and their families? On this panel, we have a mix of survivors, family members of a victim, and allied advocates. So what does it mean to work from this position and experiences in one or more of these roles?
Like everyone's been saying, education. Like what I wanted to say on the last question, some of the traffickers are the parents, our siblings, and maybe they don't even know that they're doing it. Well, I'm sure they do, but the kids, are so young, and by the time they realize it's wrong, they're 18, 19, and right now what I'm seeing here is nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody talks about it. Everyone just turns their head and don't want to even get involved in anything. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah, for
there's
sure.
really not much to say because there's nothing like everyone here just when I ask someone, and they'll just turn away and they'll change the subject or that's happening here, So you need someone like Lisa to come in and, kind of are, my
Right now,
mom
one
or
of the
her.
questions I had for you was you do this work not only as an advocate, but as a sister of someone who was trafficked and murdered. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to what it's like to do this work as an affected family member.
Um, I do this work in memory of my sister. I don't want to see any other family go through this. And there was a lot of things that I didn't know that I wish I knew back then to help. And maybe because back then I think it was unheard of, and it wasn't looked as sex trafficking. It was like that officer had told me forced prostitution. And back then there was they weren't called traffickers, they were called pimps, and that there was no laws against pimps, traffickers back then, like there is now, but not all states have. I don't think all states have that law to charge them with anything, but I see it happening so much around here. And I think that if they knew like the um what could happen, like what happened to my sister, that they would maybe they would stop. I mean, yeah, like they're not educated enough.
Mhm.
But even if it's just me and my sisters and my mom doing it, at least, I mean, to me, I'm doing my part, and I don't have to tell anybody bye, you know, but we know where we're doing these things. And like the magic, they said, when my auntie asked, they said, why do they want to do that? Well, everybody knows that's the number one spot, and it's takes no genius to figure that out, and it's in plain sight. But he said no. But I told my mom, I said, well, I guess he said no, but maybe just us guys could go up there unannounced, and just as long as we're doing something, and somebody is.
Mhm.
And I also am going to college, so I had asked the dean there to do something. I asked his secretary, and she wants to get involved. And I told her, I was speaking with her the other day, and she didn't know, all these things that were happening in our little community. And yeah, a lot of it is parents I see parents are boyfriends, and like you said, they ain't gonna want to turn them in, so, and they're making it seem that it's okay, and they're probably the most biggest, dangerous traffickers is the ones that they love, their parents, their family, and I know they take them to Fargo, and what's scary is that a truck driver could just take them and, you know, never see them.
Mhm.
And that's where they're going is, to Fargo, to the Magic, to these truck stops. And I'm so glad that we haven't had the girls disappear from here.
Mhm. Yes, well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. We know how hard it can be to be on here and to share something that's so hard. So, lots of love and prayers out to you. Thank you so much for being so strong. So, we'll move on. Melissa, could you talk about ways that communities can get involved to help support victims of trafficking and their families?
Yeah, I think the first step is acknowledging that this happens in community, um, and understanding the reasoning behind it. And I I know a lot of people don't share the views that I have. I am within Blackfoot territory. The male and female are equals. We're equal to one another, and we need to work together in order to provide a safe home and a safe community. But we are also a matriarchal society, so women are, the forefront, and they're usually the ones creating change. Um, so it is true when we say we have to help the men heal as well. If we want a healthy community, we have to provide support in unlearning that unlearning what colonial history has imposed on them, because a lot of times they they are just acting the way that they were raised to be. You know, I'm the first generation to not go to a residential school. My parents and everybody else their age has gone to residential school, and within those schools, they've picked up certain traits and habits. And if we want to move forward and create a safe space within community, we're going to have to help the men and let go of those learned behaviors, to teach them how to identify them and how to look at how, you know, how it impacts their lives and how it impacts the people that they love, because I'm sure they, you know, everybody, we're human beings, we love everybody. And then learn how to let go of that behavior. Because if we don't, they're just going to continue to teach younger generations. They're going to continue to teach the younger men and the boys. And, you know, we need to break those cycles, and we need to move forward together. And if we want to heal as a community, we need to heal everybody. We need to respect. And my family, I have aunts that have been murdered by significant others and by individuals within community. And when I was younger, I did a lot of work with awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women, but my family wasn't ready to talk about their siblings being murdered. They weren't ready to, I guess, work through those feelings and to acknowledge those feelings. They just kind of put them away. And recently, my mom is able to say that her sister is a individual, you know, within the list of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And she's the first one in her family to acknowledge that. She's the first one to say, my sister has been murdered and she is a part of MMIW. And on my other side, my family's not ready. They're not ready to have that conversation. They're not ready to talk about the pain that it brought within their family. And, you know, it's about respecting each other, but finding a way to move forward to still create change within our communities. I know of an individual that she was trafficked by her mom. But that family isn't ready to talk about it, because no parent wants to think that their child would traffic their grandchild. Nobody wants to think, you know, that that's something traumatizing. And if that's the first thing that you're going to deal with in a really long time, and if you haven't had a traumatic event since residential school and you are now aging and watching your other grandchildren grow up, you don't want to talk about the one thing that your child did, because not only are they're afraid that it's going to bring shame. They're afraid that it's going to bring dysfunction. They're afraid of what other family members are going to say. They're afraid of what community is going to say. So sometimes they're just not ready to talk about it. But as a community, we need to create a safe space. We need to acknowledge that this is happening and that this is happening in our communities. And we need to understand where these individuals are coming from. And we need to provide a safe space where they can access support in order to continue moving forward in their life. I have family members that fit this, but they're not ready to talk about it. So if they're not ready to talk about it, I can't put them out there and say, this is what I know. I can only speak about individuals or, you know, experiences that I've been given permission to share. And it's hard doing advocacy work and trying to educate people on certain situations that exist within our community when the victims themselves are not ready to talk about it. So I think it's just for communities to move forward, we need to acknowledge that it's happening. We need to listen with a open and good heart. And we need to support the families and wait for them to be ready to move forward in healing. And yeah.
Yes, I know it's so important to just have that relationship with the families and really let the families be the one to be in charge of their own stories, and to be in full control of that. And that's something that we really value here at SBI. So Lisa, would you like to talk a little bit about what the community can do to support this issue?
Yes. Yeah, I think, I mean, the thing is getting, like Melissa said, people to acknowledge it in their communities. We've, in the past done training with in our community and with casino staff, and yeah, and a lot of them were kind of blown away by the information, because they were like, "Why, I never, thought it was around here." I mean, thought it was, in other countries or other places or big cities. No, um, and once you start telling them what are some of the signs out there, and that, and then some of them like, oh yeah, I seen that, and so the more you educate and help them to the more that they're going to see those signs and start acknowledging it, and that it is real in our communities, and it is happening, that these family members are trafficking their own family members. And I just want to say that, at Pathfinder Center, you know, coming there, there is no reporting requirement at all. Women do not have to report, you know. If at some point in time in their healing they want to support, I mean, they want to report, then, we're there for them and we'll support them in whatever way. But, the number one concern is, their safety and their healing. So it's not about um, it's not about trying to get them to, send their perpetrators off to jail. Although, yeah, and, there are some of the traffickers out there that just need to be gone, and because when we talk about some of the things that there are, I don't think people realize. Well, for one, when you talk about other people trying to jump on the bandwagon and doing this work, it's a work that is not for everybody to do, because for one, it's dangerous. If you don't know what you're doing, you can endanger lives. Two, when we have organizations out there and providing you know, some of this awareness and education, and all they're doing is collecting donations, what good's that do? And it's really not going to, the victims or survivors. I know some out there that do that. And, they jumped on the bandwagon, and that, because that's what appeals to people. Oh, let's start talking about this and getting people to donate and that. And it's really sad. But like I said, for those, who are really committed to this work, to understanding what the victims and survivors go through, um, and that it is very dangerous. And I think a lot of, when I talk about, layers and layers of trauma for what survivors go through, there's also a lot that has happened to them as far as, tortures that happen to a lot of women that is just unimaginable. And that, and so for myself, um, when I heard from survivors and their stories of in being in shelters and how they were treated and being re-victimized, just broke my heart. um, and that they were being called crazy. you know they didn't understand a lot of what these survivors were going through, the triggers that they have, the post-traumatic stress, um, DID. They weren't recognizing any of these, and so um, they were calling a lot of survivors crazy and kicking them out of shelters. So a lot of them will not go to shelters because they've just been so re-traumatized by them, and that. So that is one of the main reasons why um, you know we started Pathfinder Center. Plus, I really believe it was God-given, from to us. And I mean, it was something that, you know uh, I mean, when I start hearing about trafficking years ago, and I wonder to myself, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what, I'm like thinking to, why am I learning about this? I don't see this in my community. And but I'll say one thing. I knew Creator was preparing us. I just knew that. And I'm like, okay, I know you're preparing us because it's coming. I mean, it was already here, but it's just like, okay. So I start learning more and more about it. So in 2015, when we purchased the motel, one of the things, somebody sent me this paper that was written. It was written out of Minnesota. It was um, is on the Minnesota Uprising. And so um, you all know about the Dakota 38+2. Okay, so I was reading this story, and so it talked about, the women. So after, they had hung the men and then sent the remaining to Davenport, Iowa, to prison, and then they marched the women and children down to Crow Creek, and they marched them to Crow Creek, to Fort Thompson, which is in on Crow Creek, which is Fort Thompson is a district. It's the main district hub of business. And um, so there were these, these soldiers, and so the women and the children were here, and so they weren't being provided the rations that they were promised. So a lot of them, were starving, and I mean, to the point where they would dig through the horse manure for corn just to eat. And I'm reading this, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like it's like I couldn't breathe, and my chest is so heavy. And then when I read that the women were selling their daughters to the soldiers, I just I remember driving in a car, and I was with my spouse at the time, and I just like trying to hold it in, and all of a sudden I was like, and because it just broke my heart, and I'm thinking, how in the world, why are they selling their daughters? And 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 I realized, I mean, it took me a while. I was like, well, of course they had to survive, because one, the soldiers were already raping the women and the young girls, and the mothers had to survive. They had to survive for future generations. They had to survive for when the men got out of prison, and that. And I thought about that, and I thought what it took for those women to have to do something like that. But they thought about the future generations. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them, but they did that. And so, and I say to our community, like, you know, how disrespectful when we drink, do drugs, the things that we're doing. Look at how we're disrespecting our ancestors who did what they had to do to survive so we'd be here. And what this is how we repay them, by disrespecting and using alcohol, drugs, and continuing to, you know, sell our children. No, you know, it just breaks my heart. So I knew when I read that, I was like, wow. And the person who sent me this was like, this is the reason why you're starting Pathfinder Center. And but it just blew me away, and it broke my heart. So nobody wanted to talk about that part of the Minnesota Uprising and what came out of it, what the women and children went through as well. And that needs to be told. People need to be reminded, and that. So I think, you know, that we need to confront those issues. We need to confront people. We need to challenge people. We need to challenge our relatives, our brothers and sisters, to stand up, stand against this, to stand up for our relatives who are going through this, that and not to be judgmental towards them, because we're all going through something, and that we need to support one another, and that, you know, we never know. You never know when it could happen to, you know, your daughter, your granddaughter, you know, your niece or friend, and that we need to understand it and not be judgmental. And that, and I think it's important when you're working with victims to say, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to listen to you. I'm here to believe you. I'm here to help you. And that, and here are your options.
Beautiful.
So
Thank you so much.
yeah.
So we'll do one final question for Anita, and that'll be the end of our webinar today. I just want to reiterate all of the beautiful knowledge that's been shared. Thank you so much. So Anita, in closing, what can communities do to help survivors of trafficking? And maybe even more specifically, what is the non-Native allies' role in this crisis?
I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers today for sharing as much as they have. Lisa, what you just shared was so powerful, and really, I feel it in my heart. And I think it's a really good reminder. One of the most important things we can do is to not have that stigma against people who have been trafficked or who have done survival sex work. The reality is, and it's, you know, it's heartbreaking to say, but the reality is, for us as Indigenous people, pretty much all of us are a descendant of someone who's been raped. And most of us are a descendant of somebody who's been trafficked or sexually exploited, even if we don't necessarily know that history. And so I think it's an inheritance for all of us, to think about what we can do to honor those ancestors, to make sure it doesn't continue to happen to future generations. And I know for me, as a survivor and as a descendant of a survivor of trafficking, that's a big part of my personal motivation, and a big part of what we do at SBI, is trying to live up to that. I think one thing that's really important that I want to reiterate here is the importance of family and survivor leadership. Support the leadership of survivors, support the leadership of impacted families, because they know this issue better than anybody. And they have kind of more, like, I hate the phrase like skin in the game, but you know, they do. There's so much, they have so much power and resilience and brilliant ideas and beautiful hearts that can contribute so much. I was talking to one of our board members about this yesterday because there's a person we know who did survival sex work a long time ago and has really worked hard to rebuild their lives. And we were talking about how much leadership potential that person has and how frustrating it is that their community doesn't really see that in them or recognize it because they still see the sex worker from 20 years ago. And just feeling frustrated that, you know, hey, this person has so much to give to the community and gives it, even though people judge them constantly. That needs to change. So getting rid of that stigma is absolutely crucial in supporting family and survivor leadership. But I do want to say there is a role for everyone in this work, even if you're not a frontline provider. I think Lisa is absolutely right. Not everyone's cut out to be a frontline provider. It takes so much out of you mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And you're responsible for a lot. As Lisa said, you're responsible for other people's safety. Their lives are at stake. So it's not something to take lightly. So, you know, frontline work isn't necessarily for everyone, but just because you're not a frontline worker doesn't mean that there's not something you can do for this issue. Fundraise for places like Pathfinder Center, raise awareness on the awesome work that they're doing, help educate the community on what trafficking actually looks like, make a platform for survivor leadership and survivor voices. There's so many weird memes out there about, you know, being kidnapped out of a Walmart parking lot that just aren't really the reality of trafficking and don't match what's happening in our communities. The most common stories are people being trafficked by a family member or a romantic partner. And so what can we do to kind of dispel the myths and start educating people on what it actually looks like and what the power and potential of survivor leadership really is? Those are things all of us can do, whether we work in this movement full time or, you know, are volunteering our time here and there. And I do want to encourage everybody to check out on SBI's website. Last year, we published an organizing toolkit for people who are interested in getting involved on both trafficking and missing and murdered Indigenous people. It's a beautiful toolkit with chapters written by families, by survivors, and it's got sections on everything you could think of: data, media, policymaking, boots on the ground work. No matter what your entry point is, there's something for you to do. And the toolkit's got activity guides, resource sheets. It's meant to be really interactive, and it's not about us telling you what to do, but giving you the tools to figure out what your community needs and what your entry point is. So that's free for download on our site. If you're interested in getting involved, please do download that. And again, you know, if you have an extra couple dollars to give, Pathfinder Center does incredible work. So please do donate.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And those listening, sorry we didn't get to the questions, although there's been so much knowledge and expertise shared here that I do think we covered most of the questions that did come up in the chat. So like I said at the beginning, this is part of our awareness month for Trafficking Awareness Month in January. We are doing more webinars. So our next one will be next Wednesday at 5:30 Pacific time. We'll be doing a Meet the Survivors live storytelling and question and answer session. And then next Friday on the 29th, we'll be having a webinar with our Survivors Leadership Council talking about trafficking and Native foster youth. So we'll catch you next time. Thank you.